You know what's terrifying? It's not saying yes when you want to. It's saying yes when every fiber of your being is screaming no, and still doing it over and over until you can't remember the last time you actually wanted to do something you agreed to. If that's you, this isn't about being nice. It's about something darker. The word forms in your mind. No. Clear, simple, completely reasonable. Someone asks you for a favor you don't have time for, an invitation to something you have no interest in, a request that will drain you in ways they'll never understand. And the no is right there, ready, waiting. But then something happens. You feel it in your chest, that tightness, that panic. That voice that says, if you say no, they'll be disappointed. They'll think you don't care. They'll stop liking you. And so you hear yourself say yes, again. And the moment it leaves your mouth, you feel it. The resentment, the exhaustion, the quiet rage at yourself for doing this one more time. And here's what makes it worse. You know you're doing it. You're fully aware. It's not like you're oblivious to the pattern. You see yourself agreeing to things you don't want to do. You watch yourself overcommit and then scramble to keep every promise you never wanted to make. You feel your energy draining as you show up for everyone except yourself. But knowing doesn't stop it. If anything, the awareness makes it more painful because now you're not just betraying yourself, you're watching yourself do it in real time. So what's actually happening here? Because if it were just about being helpful or kind, it wouldn't feel this bad. If it were really about generosity, you wouldn't resent the very people you're saying yes to. The truth is, chronic people-pleasing isn't about kindness, it's about fear. And the psychology behind why you can't say no reveals something about how you learned to survive in a world that didn't feel safe enough to be yourself in. Psychologists call this fawn response. It's one of the lesser-known trauma responses alongside fight, flight, and freeze. When you grow up in an environment where your safety, whether physical or emotional, depends on keeping others happy, your nervous system learns that saying yes is survival, that accommodating others is how you avoid conflict, rejection, or abandonment. Your brain doesn't see no as boundary setting, it sees it as danger, because somewhere in your history, saying no had consequences you couldn't afford. Maybe you grew up with a parent whose moods were unpredictable, and you learned early that managing their emotions was your job. That if you could just be good enough, agreeable enough, helpful enough, maybe things would stay calm. Maybe you wouldn't have to deal with their disappointment or anger or withdrawal. So you became the easy child. The one who never complained, the one who said yes to everything because no felt too risky. Or maybe it wasn't that dramatic. Maybe you just learned through 1,000 small interactions that your worth was conditional, that love was something you earned through usefulness, that being wanted meant being accommodating, that people only valued you for what you could do for them, not for who you actually were. And so you built your entire identity around being helpful, around being the person who never says no. Because if you stopped being useful, what would be left? Who would you be if you weren't needed? Here's where the psychology gets complicated. Because people who can't say no often have what's called an external locus of validation. Your sense of worth doesn't come from inside, it comes from other people's approval, from their gratitude, from their dependence on you. You don't feel valuable because you exist. You feel valuable because you're useful. And that's a terrifying way to live, because it means your entire sense of self is contingent on other people's needs, on their reactions, on their continued approval of you. Neuroscientifically, something specific happens in your brain when you even think about saying no. Your amygdala, the fear center, lights up. It registers the potential of disappointing someone as a genuine threat. Meanwhile, your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for rational decision-making, gets overridden. You're not making a choice, you're having a fear response. Your body floods with cortisol, your heart rate increases, and your brain does what it's been trained to do. Eliminate the threat by saying yes, by accommodating, by erasing your own needs to maintain the other person's comfort. And here's what people don't understand about this pattern. You're not weak, you're not spineless, you're not just too nice for your own good. You're someone whose nervous system learned that self-preservation meant self-erasure, that the safest way to exist was to not have needs, to not take up space, to not inconvenience anyone with your preferences or boundaries or limitations. You learned to disappear into usefulness, and now, even when you're safe, even when saying no wouldn't actually destroy you, your body doesn't know that. It still responds like your survival depends on being agreeable.
But let's talk about what this costs you, because it's not just time or energy, though it's definitely those things. Every yes you give when you mean no is a betrayal, not of the other person, of yourself. It's telling your inner world that other people's comfort matters more than your own, that their needs are more legitimate than yours, that their disappointment is more important than your exhaustion. And your psyche is keeping track, every single time. Maybe you've noticed how you feel after saying yes to something you didn't want to do. There's this specific kind of exhaustion that isn't just physical, it's deeper. It's the exhaustion of living outside yourself, of performing a version of you that's accommodating and available and endlessly flexible when the real you is screaming for rest, for space, for permission to just be selfish for once without the crushing guilt that follows. And then there's the resentment, the slow-building anger that you can't quite direct anywhere because it's not really about the people asking. They don't know you don't want to say yes. You're too good at hiding it. You smile, you agree, you show up, and they have no idea it's costing you everything. So the resentment turns inward. You're angry at yourself for being weak, for not having boundaries, for being unable to do what seems so simple for everyone else. Just say no. Research shows that people who struggle with boundary setting often score high in agreeableness and neuroticism. Agreeableness means you're naturally cooperative, empathetic, oriented toward harmony. Those are beautiful traits. But when combined with neuroticism, which includes sensitivity to negative emotions and fear of rejection, they create a dangerous loop. You desperately want to avoid disappointing people, and you're hypervigilant to any sign that you might have. So you overcompensate. You say yes to everything. You become the person who never lets anyone down, except yourself, constantly. There's also something called rejection sensitivity at play here. Studies show that people with high rejection sensitivity perceive rejection where none exists. Someone's neutral face looks disappointed. Someone's delayed text feels like abandonment. Someone asking if you're sure about something feels like criticism. Your brain is constantly scanning for evidence that you're failing, that you're not enough, that you're about to be rejected. And saying no feels like handing them the reason they've been looking for to leave. But here's the paradox. The more you say yes to maintain relationships, the more those relationships become transactional. People don't know the real you. They know the version who's always available, always helpful, always accommodating. So the closeness you're trying to create by saying yes is actually hollow, because they're not connected to you, they're connected to what you do for them. And somewhere deep down, you know this. You know that if you stopped saying yes, some of these relationships would disappear. And that knowledge is terrifying because it confirms what you've always feared, that you're only loved for your usefulness, not your inherent worth. Maybe you've also noticed how this pattern affects your decision-making in other areas, because when you can't say no to others, you also can't say yes to yourself. You can't commit to your own goals because you've already committed your time to everyone else. You can't pursue what you actually want because you're too busy doing what others need. You can't build the life you dream about because you're too exhausted from maintaining everyone else's comfort to have anything left for your own desires. And the worst part? People have learned to rely on this. Your friends know you'll always say yes. Your family knows you'll show up. Your coworkers know you'll take on extra work. And while they might appreciate it, they're also unconsciously taking advantage of something you trained them to expect. You taught them that your boundaries don't exist, that your time is always available, that your needs are always negotiable. And now trying to change that feels impossible because it means disappointing everyone who's come to depend on your inability to say no. Here's what needs to be understood. Your inability to say no isn't a personality trait. It's a survival mechanism that's outlived its usefulness. It protected you once. Maybe it kept you safe in an environment where asserting yourself was genuinely dangerous. Maybe it helped you maintain relationships when you didn't have the skills or support to navigate conflict. But what protected you then is destroying you now. Because you're not that child anymore. You're not in that environment anymore. But your nervous system hasn't updated. It's still responding to threats that don't exist, still sacrificing your needs to avoid consequences that won't actually happen. So what does healing look like? Not overnight transformation, not suddenly becoming someone who says no to everything, but starting to recognize the fear response when it happens, starting to pause between the request and your automatic yes, starting to ask yourself, do I actually want to do this? Do I have the capacity? Or am I just afraid of what will happen if I say no?
It means practicing saying no in low-stakes situations, with strangers, with people whose opinions don't determine your worth. Building the muscle slowly, so that when it matters, when someone you care about asks for something you can't give, you have the neural pathway to access that boundary. Because right now, that pathway doesn't exist. Your brain doesn't have a reference for saying no and surviving. So, you have to create one. It also means sitting with the discomfort that comes after. Because when you finally say no, your nervous system will panic. It will flood you with guilt and anxiety and fear that you've destroyed everything. And you have to be able to hold that discomfort without immediately trying to fix it, without apologizing profusely or over-explaining or taking back your no. You have to trust that the relationship can survive your boundary. And if it can't, then it was never a real relationship. It was a transaction you were too afraid to end. Here's the hard truth. Some people will be disappointed when you start saying no. Some will push back. Some will guilt you or make you feel selfish or stop reaching out. And that will hurt. But those responses will also reveal something important. Who was actually connected to you versus who was connected to your compliance. The people who truly care about you will adjust. They'll respect your boundaries, even if they're initially surprised by them. Because real relationships can handle honesty. Real love doesn't require self-erasure. And maybe you also need to grieve something. The fantasy that you can make everyone happy. That if you just try hard enough, if you're just accommodating enough, everyone will love you and no one will leave. That fantasy is killing you, because it's not possible. You will disappoint people. You will let people down. Not because you're failing, but because you're human. And humans have limits, needs, boundaries. And pretending you don't only makes you resentful and exhausted and disconnected from your own life. But here's what also needs to be said. Learning to say no doesn't make you selfish. It makes you honest. It makes you someone who respects themselves enough to stop betraying their own needs for the comfort of others. It makes you someone who understands that real kindness includes being kind to yourself. That real generosity includes not depleting yourself until there's nothing left. That you can't pour from an empty cup, and you've been empty for longer than you want to admit.
So maybe the question isn't, how do I say no? Maybe the question is, what am I so afraid will happen if I do? What rejection am I trying to avoid? What abandonment am I preventing? What version of myself am I protecting by staying small and accommodating and endlessly available? And is that protection still necessary? Or is it just a prison you've mistaken for safety? Because here's the truth. You deserve relationships where your yes means something because your no is possible. You deserve to be valued for who you are, not what you do. You deserve to take up space without apologizing for it. Your needs are not negotiable. Your boundaries are not selfishness. Your exhaustion is not a request for more opportunities to say yes. It's your body begging you to finally choose yourself. You are not responsible for managing everyone else's emotions. You are not required to sacrifice yourself to maintain other people's comfort. You are not selfish for having limits. You are human, and humans are allowed to say no, even to people they love, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it disappoints someone. Your worth is not conditional on your compliance, and the sooner you believe that, the sooner you can stop living for everyone else and start living for yourself. If this resonated, if you felt the weight of every yes you never meant, leave a comment. What are you afraid will happen if you say no? And if you want more of these confrontational truths, subscribe, because we're just getting started.